Okay. So for those coming in, sorry I missed the first couple part there. We didn't miss much in the terms of slides. We were just talking about the configuration files and the interactions coming into it. I was talking mostly about XML files where you guys will be able to import, export. You guys will do this at the end of the semester when you get to your capstone lab. And that XML file you'll actually submit up to me. For the labs themselves, you guys do not have to submit those at this time. And I'll show you guys how to do that when we get to that stage. From the commit tab, a lot of this I covered last week, which is the ability to load configurations, being able to save name snapshots, etc., from what you see in the device operations tab. You can also see this little folder button up here at the top. That's also going to allow you to get to that save tree that you see over there on the right-hand side. You can also lock this system. You'll see a little padlock in between there. That would allow other admins not to make changes to the system, even your current candidate configuration. They wouldn't be able to make changes to. When you go to commit your changes, it'll tell you what scope it's going to be coming from. So from the device and network stuff or policy and objects. Again, you'll have the options to preview those changes, make changes, so we can see what was trying to be made by, for example, admin Bob, and what was made by the original admin, and we can acknowledge those changes between the two. So yes, you can have more than one admin on the system. They could submit changes for commit, and so you have to be very careful that you're not committing somebody else's changes, especially if they weren't intending for them to actually be committed to the system. Let's see. In the commit status, you're going to come back and you'll see that task button that we talked about in the lower right-hand side. Again, Lab 1 covered a lot of this material. In the upper right, you have the ability to save changes and revert changes. This goes back to those preview changes. So as I mentioned before, you guys will really want to do this, is to at least go in and either preview your changes or more than likely a change summary and validate your commit on top of it. The idea is you can make sure that what you wanted to change actually is what saved inside of there. Now, you don't have to read the entire thing. You can, what's nice is it's all highlighted. So if anything was in orange, it's modified. If it's green, it's all new stuff. You should be seeing new or green, depending on what you're doing on the system. If you're seeing a bunch of other stuff, or like more importantly, red, then we have some problems, right? Because you deleted some stuff out of the configuration file.
Wait, Jason, I got a question here.
Yeah.
Can a change be reverted once it's committed?
Yeah, once it's committed, then you would want to go back to the last snapshot or the last change. But yes, you can revert back, provided you didn't completely break something that didn't allow you access into the firewall. So if you're using that out-of-band management, you should be fine. But if you're doing in-band stuff, it's very possible you committed something that ended up kicking you from even having access. A lot of this, where this comes into play, is if you're doing all this remote and working from home. Happens a lot. For example, a lot of the firewalls I manage are all based out of North Carolina, and I'm doing it from here. So I have to be careful that if I'm on the VPN and I commit a bunch of changes to the firewall and the firewall runs through the VPN, what's going to happen if I blew away configuration changes on the VPN? And I've done it. So you always have to set yourself up some kind of backdoor or some way to get into your system in the event that the config changes didn't take. So we tend to do that a lot, is I'll set up like a backdoor or just a remote desktop, something I can hop through any firewall and get access to it. And then once the upgrade's complete and everything's done, then we can go ahead and tear back down the backdoor. Obviously important that you tear down the backdoor when you're done. We find a lot of them just leave it up and running, and that defeats the whole purpose of having the firewall in the first place. Yeah.
A lot of settings have like a countdown timer for if you want to revert back. This app or something like that, if you lock yourself out, it realizes you're not there anymore.
I don't think it will have a revert back on the actual configuration file, but there are, like on policies, you can actually set timeouts and things like that on policies. Yeah. The padlock, this goes back to that transition lock I was talking about before, where you can lock your changes and that keeps other admins from changing that candidate configuration. That way they don't go and commit something that they weren't supposed to. As far as logs, you guys will see this up at the top. So there's the monitor tab, and then over on the left-hand side are all the logs that are set up on this system. You guys will use quite a bit of these to get through. They're showing the system one there. The main one you guys would use is the traffic logs. And that's a way for you to make sure traffic is traversing like you would expect. Or if it's being blocked, you can find out what rule it's going up against, why it's being blocked, et cetera, et cetera. I basically live and breathe in these logs. If I got something wrong, first place to go is go look at the logs and see what's going on. The way Palo Alto does logs is fairly easy. You get used to the command syntax. Like I wouldn't say that you would end up memorizing the syntax as it goes through. You would actually click on things and it will auto-populate the syntax. And you'll see what we're talking about when we get a little closer. So the logs up at the top allow you to go to the system side. You can run queries. That's what the search bar is up at the top. And then you'll have a right arrow that allows you to run the query, which will end up filtering things out. If you click the X, it'll end up clearing the filter. And then you can click on any listing and that will add it as a filter option. So for example, if we look at the monitor logs configuration one there at the bottom, and I want to find everything that came from host 192.168.1.20, I click on that, it will automatically add that as a filter. I hit go, and then it will filter all my logs based off that. So you can memorize how to do all these filters. It's much easier just to click on the system, let it auto-populate it. If you need to change the IP, you just click up there and change the IP, right? That way you don't have to get the exact syntax. Some of you guys have done the B-sides competition where we did like the Splunk and stuff, and you guys will remember it's like a really funky syntax. You got to put everything in. That's really what this is, but you don't have to necessarily memorize all of that. I don't. I can tell you that. I've used the filter, and then I come in and then change what I need to change inside of there. Inside of there, you can also pull down a CSV file format at the top. You can also add your own filters. So if you don't remember what you wanted to do, you can use this filter chain. So for example, here, everything's done in parentheses for that chunk. So this would be the IP address source in 192.168.1.25, and the destination is 192.168.50.53. This is what the filter would look like up there in the middle of the screen. And so you can, again, build these out and then hit apply, or you could go click on the log, grab a input or grab a source, grab a destination, and then change those IPs to what you want. So either way works. All right. That's all that's in this material. Again, this one's fairly thin. We'll go through some questions and like a Q&A in here. This week, you guys can do the lab. We could do it in person here, but it's going to be a very fast lab. I'll tell you that, because you're just going to go click through the logs. They're actually going to spawn issues in the logs, and you'll go back and find threats in the logs and stuff like that. It's a good lab to do, because when you start troubleshooting later, learning how to add things in there, that's really what I'm going to walk you through, is how to add those different ones for the main ones that I play with. All right. So question wise, see if I can pull these up here in the slideshow. Zoop. Nope. Wrong button. Again, I know this seems like very little material. You're still in the first 3 weeks, whatever it is now, 4 weeks. It gets heavy real fast when we get into policies and stuff. So, which two statements are true regarding the candidate configuration? A, it controls the current operation of the firewall. B, it contains possible changes to that current configuration. C, it can be reverted to the current configuration. Or D, it always contains the factory default configuration.
B and C.
B and C.
Anybody got any questions or thoughts otherwise? B and C sounds pretty good to me. True or false, the running configuration consists of changes in progress, but is not active on the firewall.
True.
False, right? The keyword is running configuration versus candidate configuration. Running means it's loaded up on the firewall, and active. Okay. Somebody have something online? Sorry.
I was just talking to myself. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. All right. When committing changes to a firewall, what results from clicking on preview changes link? Shows any errors that would appear during a commit, lists the individual settings for which you are committing changes, compares the candidate configuration with the running configuration, or displays any unresolved application dependencies.
C.
C. Yep, C looks about right, right? So it's going to compare that running configuration with the candidate configuration and give you an idea of what's going to change. If it's green, it means what? Brand new. If it's red, and orange means modified, right? Cool. True or false? The export operations transfer configurations as XML formatted files from the firewall.
True.
Yep. Yeah, Palo Alto is going to use XML for all their stuff. That's why on their API side, they have an API or REST API or a XML style API that you can interact with as well. So it's pretty easy to work with. It also makes it handy for you guys that like to automate stuff with Python or Ansible or that kind of stuff because it's all XML. It's very easy to script things out or extract information from. Dump it all into objects. All right, let's see if you're all right. So B, C, false, C, and A is true. Cool. So how did last week go? Did you guys get through all your labs? Okay. No issues getting access or anything like that? Couple questions that popped up over that. Make sure when you're scheduling a lab that you click directly below the line. That way you're not scheduling for the next 30-minute block. That was one that a couple people had issues with. Always make sure you are clicking the links from Blackboard. Otherwise, no score gets reported back to the system, and therefore I can't give you guys any grades, right? Therefore, that means, you could do the lab ahead of time if you wanted to by skating the system like we showed. But if you wanted to count for points during the week of, you just have to do it during the week of.
And that's just specifically for the lab itself, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yep. How about the quizzes? You guys having any struggle there? So far, so good. Reading material? Pretty easy to get through.
Question on the reading material. It looks like the reading material, the interactive thing has the more information than the reading material.
Sometimes, yes, that is the case. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's obviously just the PowerPoint and stuff is just going to be a brief overview. If you do go back and look at the notes that are in these, you will get some more information here because I think I posted a lot of these inside of there. But you should get some more information in these as well. But yeah, make sure you're going through those interactive displays and such. Don't skip them because you're going to get a lot more background information that will actually be quizzed over. That's what I was curious. Is anybody struggling on quizzes because they're just listening to me talk and not actually going through the interactive side? So. Okay. One thing we will do, like I said, about mid-semester, we're going to sprinkle in some OpenSense labs, and so you guys will have access and some exposure to what that is and how that compares to this. I like to let you get a little bit into the pfSense so you at least, or the Palo, so you at least understand the concepts of firewalls. Then we can go ahead and dive into other firewalls and how they compare between the two. Because there's OpenSense is great because it's free. You guys can load it up. You can create little VMs and do that, but you'll quickly see the difference just in the UI itself of what a very expensive firewall looks like compared to an open source firewall and what resources are available between the two kind of thing. So.
There could be like a preferential difference between OpenSense and pfSense.
Really boils down to money. That I don't know how else to put it. It really boils down to money. If you're a small mom and pop shop running down here, we tend to run pfSense or OpenSense box for those people. Just because you can get a little name's escaping me. It's not Netgear. Yep, gone. It's the official hardware brand of pfSense. A lot of people will use those. pfSense is pretty common for a lot of that. OpenSense is gaining a little bit of popularity, and you can buy little computers for this. You can buy little boards on Amazon and stuff like that for $150, and you can have a pretty powerful firewall to do what you need it to do inside of there. Netgate, that's it. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, Netgate's basically the hardware vendor of choice for pfSense. And then OpenSense actually sells their own hardware now too. So you could order them if you want it specifically, or you can load it up on XYZ device. So if you go on like Amazon and you find one of the little PCs on there, micro PCs with 4 or 5 Ethernet ports, that kind of thing, then you can do the same thing of I want this one to be WAN, these 4 to be LAN, or 2 WAN, 3 LAN, whatever you want it to be. Even little Celeron boxes will do pretty good with a lot of, especially if it's a newer Celeron, they're pretty beefy on what they do in there. Most firewalls, you don't have to have a ton. Where you start to need a lot of processing is if you're going to start doing the IDS, IPS side of things, where you're doing intrusion detection and such. Now you're all of a sudden you're going to need more RAM, more CPU, that kind of stuff. And if you don't, that's where the throughput drops, right? So if you remember when we looked at the specs of like the 220 device, it would, do a gig connection, but the process throughput of it was like 500 meg or something like that. You get capped out. And that's because it's having to send and crunch every packet that comes through.
And for the grad project, you would prefer to have like physical hardware firewall as opposed to?
Nope, you can do a virtual machine. So a lot of times in the grad project, students will, I used to just have them install like OpenSense and stuff in a virtual machine, throw a couple NIC cards in there and then kind of go in. That's probably what we'll do, only you guys are going to have labs against doing that this year. So it may be a little more stretched out on the grad project. Like you'll need to go research one of the services that are offered, like Saracata, for example. And I would have you guys tell me how you would add Saracata to your pfSense box or your OpenSense box kind of thing. Those are some of the other names that'll pop in here. So I think I had this actually in a text file open when I came in. So knowing services or tools like these that are listed here. So Snort, Saracata, Graylog, Wazoo, these are all different tools that you would use. For example, Graylog and Wazoo, I don't know if Wazoo is actually spelled right the way it's in there, but those are logging services. And so Graylog being, I don't remember if it's based off open source, but I don't think it's fully open source. With syslog and things like that, you guys would learn that in the network defense class, those that are in the grad program. Snort and Saracata is what you guys would use for IDS, IPS type stuff. Snort being the old school one that everybody would use. Saracata uses snort rules and things like that laced over the top of it. And a lot of times you can pay for these tools outside of it to get OpenSense or pfSense up to the level of what like a Palo Alto would be. A good example too is like Ubiquity. So Ubiquity is now a zone-based firewall. They have the ability to be one. And then you also have the ability to use, the name's escaping me, cyber something. I was just playing with it this morning, where you would get things like the equivalent of wildfire and stuff that you get in the pfSense. You can now get that in like Ubiquity products as well, where you're getting updates on virus threats and antivirus and prevention and that kind of stuff, IDS, IPS type materials. Anybody else have any other questions? Good questions.
That's Waza.
Waza. Yeah. Yep. I knew that didn't look right when I had it on there. I was quickly throwing some notes in there when I was on a different call.
You can add those to either OpenSense or pfSense.
Yep. Yeah, so like your pfSense, or for example, Palo Alto, right? We have all the logs, and that's great to have them on the device. But if you want to correlate it with other stuff on the network, it's nice to have everything go back to a centralized logging system. And that's what you would use Graylog and that stuff for. So at some point, that's actually what I'll show you guys, is being able to take the pfSense logs that we're used to, but spinning them into something more centralized like Graylog or syslog or something in there. Even a security onion virtual machine, you could use that as your base and then send everything to that if you wanted to. And Security Onion is just a group of these kind of apps all put together in a nice little package, is all it is.
Hey, Jason, I have a quick question regarding the certification. Is
Yeah.
this course going to prepare us for any certification out there?
Yep, it'll be the Palo Alto PCNSA.
Okay. Are we going to get a completion of course certification after we're done with this?
Yes, you are. Yep. Yeah, it should prepare you for the PCSNA, if I remember right. That one there. Oops, wrong one. I mean, it is the right one, but yes, that's, you guys would get that original course there. PCSNA. That is not it. Let's try this again. Palo Alto. There we go. So you got all these fundamental ones that are down here. You guys are looking for the PCNSA as the one that you guys would be chasing down. Eventually, you could go up to the engineer level, which, so PCNSA is going to be equivalent to like your CCNA of the Palo Alto side. And then your PCNSE is going to be more like your CC. I wouldn't even call it CCNP. It'd be more like you're closer to a CCIE level. And yeah, and sometimes, I don't know if they still do it. It changes every semester, to be honest. But if they give me vouchers, then you guys will get like discount vouchers if you're going to go take the cert. And I've had several students go and take the cert after the class and had no problems. They did some practice, went through the exams at the end of this kind of thing, and mostly hammered home on the labs, and they were able to do the cert just fine.
Are we going to have access to the labs after completing this course?
Yes. So the what you'll have them as long as you have access to the Blackboard shell. And then if you are going to take the certification, email me and I will dump you in a separate NetLab course shell that will allow you to have access, and till you tell me you're done, kind of thing, or until 6 years later when I'm doing cleanup and realize I need to get you out of there. So, but yes, absolutely. If you're going to take the cert, you can have all the lab access you want. I have no problem with that.
For that mom and pop scenario
Mhm.
that you mentioned, what's the like key difference between, I guess, that and the personal side? What's the difference between like a physical machine or like an open sense sense versus it all just running in a virtual machine?
Yeah. So for those online, the question is when speaking like mom and pop shops or small businesses, at what point does real hardware make sense over virtual machines or vice versa between the two? The key with having real hardware is you have a dedicated piece of equipment for that. So it's one more piece of equipment you got to support, you got to power, you got to go through. But it also means if you do it as a VM and you got to take down your Proxmox server or VMware server, your firewall goes down too, right? So you have trade-offs between the two. What's nice about the virtualized side, if you have it configured correctly, you can usually swap that VM around to a couple machines. So you usually have somewhat, I wouldn't call it a cluster because it doesn't need to be a full-blown cluster, but a cluster is nice where you could shift that VM around and then nothing ever dies if you got to take a host down. On real equipment, there's no way to really do that unless you're going to HA or high availability. And in case you would have two of them and you would have the ability to make one running and one fail over, that kind of stuff. You'll actually do that with the Palo Altos and the later labs where I believe you do. You set up HA. Actually, I don't know if the labs still have that or not. I think there's only one in the lab, but I can show you what an active and passive one would look like. We even use them in bigger businesses. So, for example, the ones that we have as VMs, the VM500s, we basically have a VMware machine on a super micro blade, and then another VMware machine that's a super micro blade. And then between the two of them, they're completely paired the same. And then we run the virtualized infrastructure on top of that. And the reason we do that was we, at that time, were a big VMware shop. And so we could swing it if we needed to off other hosts, but we had HA between the two. So if one host went down, we could repair it, replace it, kind of go on through.
So are you running those VMs on-prem or on a cloud infrastructure?
Those were on-prem.
Okay.
You can also run them in the cloud. So that's more getting into their cloud product, which is like a VM50, a little different than that. It depends on how you have it configured and set up, but they offer the VM like 500s in those. You can do it as either QCOW images, which was what you guys would use for Proxmox or KVM style hypervisors, or they have the VMware image that you guys could use on the VMware infrastructure side too. The real deal on hardware and stuff is it boils down to what you're using it for. We've had things where the virtual machine was great. We never had any issues. Then we had this massive power outage at the data center, which shouldn't happen. It's a data center. And in this case, what happened was it kicked over to diesel generator. It ran for a week, ran out of diesel. So they had to live fuel the data center back up. That was okay. Then in theory, landlines came back on, or land shore power. When they went to cut it back over, it killed everything. So, and that happens. I mean, this was a really redundant data center with 19 levels, but the moment it flipped back over for whatever reason, it killed everybody in the data center. So once it got back online, that's great. Well, guess what? The last admin forgot to set auto start boot on the firewall, and we couldn't get into it. So we had no way to remote into the system to tell it, you know what I mean? So that's the caveat of the firewalls, is you got to make sure you always have a backup way of getting into some of those systems. But you got to protect your back door too, right? Because now you just created yourself a back door around the front. So that's why I said, like in our case, a good example is I'll fire up a OpenSense VM on the infrastructure and pipe the true internet to it. And then I will set up a quick VPN for me to come in through. Then I'll do maintenance on my Palo Altos because they're all going down, so I can't use the Global Protect stuff. Once everything's done, I actually shut back down that virtual machine, and then I don't have to worry about my open outside connection going through. We've also used little boxes, like I mentioned before. Go buy a $140 mini PC with 2 Ethernet ports, and we'll slap it in a rack somewhere, and that is kind of our jump box in the event power goes down or whatever else. That connection lights up, and it does that by routes. So we'll set it up that if we can't ping or route to this connection, all of a sudden this one becomes live, and all it is a VPN hop for us to be on the network, mostly to fix the problem we had with that data center going down. Thankfully, it wasn't a huge drive. I mean, it was a pain, but the one guy that runs that data center for us, or at least manages it on our side, had left on vacation. Out of the 2 weeks out of the year he happens to leave. It just happened to fall all in one line. So, and that's, if anybody's been in IT long enough, that's what happens. It's the worst case scenario is the one that always happens. Anybody else got any questions? There's great questions. Cool. If you guys think of stuff along the way that you want to see or you want to play or want to test that you don't see in these labs, say something. Like those of you that have been around me long enough know I'm a kid in a candy store. I love playing with stuff. So if you say, hey, I'd be really interested in seeing how this works against that, awesome. Now I got something to go do. So now I don't want to be up till 11:30 like last night trying to get a firewall up and running, but I will get something going up before class. All right, I'll stop the recording there, and we'll see everybody on Thursday.